The General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is keeping little children locked in a freezer. Last week, in the previous video, we documented how, according to the CDC, the GC is engaged in impregnating single women. That is, of course, a serious problem by itself, but this week we'll address children in the freezer. Let's start with the facts. Fact: according to the official Adventist News Network and other sources, Loma University and Hospital is the flagship medical institution of the Adventist Church. Fact: there are many hospitals and institutions owned and operated by various levels of the Adventist Church, but what is very special about Loma Linda is that this is directly operated by the General Conference. You can go right now to the official website, adventistyearbook.org, click on World Divisions, click on GC, click on Institutions, and you can see right here Loma University and Medical Center. Unlike many others, this is a GC institution. It is the only hospital directly run by the General Conference. Fact: in vitro fertilization, or IVF, is the process of taking a woman's egg out of her body and fertilizing it in a lab with sperm and then placing the resulting embryonic child back in the woman's uterus with the hope that the child will survive and grow to term. Oftentimes, there are several embryonic children created in the lab, and these children are placed in a freezer or thrown away. Fact: according to Johns Hopkins University, there are over 1.5 million embryos currently frozen across the U.S. Or here, Wall Street Journal, more than 1 million embryos are in cold storage. What should happen to them? Fact: Loma Linda, the GC flagship institution, has an IVF clinic. Did you know that? Fact: just a few days ago, I called and spoke with the receptionist there, who confirmed that yes, they do keep embryonic children in the freezer. When I asked how many, she said she did not know, as she was only the receptionist, and that I would need to schedule an appointment with the doctor to learn more, but the wait time is at least 4 to 5 months. I'm not waiting that long. So it is a fact that the GC, via its flagship institution, is keeping little embryonic boys and girls locked in a freezer. It is an irrefutable scientific fact that a new human being is created at conception, not before, not after. Even secular embryology textbooks admit the following quote: "Human life begins at fertilization, the process during which a sperm unites with an oocyte ovum to form a single cell called a zygote. This highly specialized, totipotent cell marked the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. A zygote is the beginning of a new human being, i.e. an embryo." So every person watching this video began your existence as a whole, complete, distinct, living human being as an embryo. Infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, old age, these are simply terms to describe different stages of human development. An embryo, or embryonic, is just as much a stage as is adolescence. Nobody ever says, "I came from a child," because that would be absurd. You did not come from a child because you were a child. It was you as a child, you as an infant, as a teenager, and you as an embryo. The only difference between these stages is time and development. You did not come from an embryo. You were an embryo. An embryo is a living human being, a very little boy or girl. Now, some people will say, well, it doesn't look like a human being, but that is false, because it looks exactly like a human being should look at that stage of development. The General Conference keeping children in freezers, this causes all sorts of problems. We'll only address just a few of them. Number one, the biggest problem facing IVF is, of course, what to do with the children in embryonic form who are not wanted. Loma Linda openly acknowledges on their website that one option is to just dispose of the unwanted children. Just thaw them out and let them die. In an article titled, "I Stopped Wasting Time and Used an Egg Donor," the Loma Linda Clinic admits right here that they took, count them, 40 donated eggs and fertilized them with the man's sperm, thus creating 40 children. The doctor then transferred 2 of the embryonic children into the woman, and she became pregnant. And the article admits that the couple still has 9 frozen embryonic children left in the freezer. As Adventist Christians, our first question of many should be, what exactly is the General Conference policy for these children? Now, let's do the math. Loma Linda openly admits on their own website that in just this one case, they created 40 children. They implanted 2, so 40 minus 2, that leaves 38 children. However, they then say that there are only 9 in the freezer. 38 minus 9 equals 29. So what happened to the other 29 children? Considering the enormous seriousness of this situation, President Ted Wilson and Assistant to the President Mark Finley must give an explanation immediately. It is unconscionable that their leading flagship institution has apparently lost or destroyed 29 children, and that's just one. That's just one case. How many hundreds or thousands of children have been lost or destroyed? You may remember at the 2018 Annual Council, we were lectured to by the GC Treasurer that when it comes to tithe, every single dollar is sacred and must be accounted for. So what about these children? Are they less sacred? What exactly is the policy? Where is the accountability? The General Conference Treasurer said tithe amount doesn't matter. Even a little tiny dollar must be, and I quote, treated very much with the same degree of rigor, reverence, and respect. Oh, so where exactly is the rigor and respect for children who are locked in the freezer and 29 missing children? This is the GC flagship institution, so the GC is directly accountable for these children. And because this has gone on for so long, they now have a huge problem on their hands. If you are ever in a discussion with an Adventist or any Christian for that matter on the topic of IVF, you must ask the question, what to do with unwanted embryonic children? Don't let them get away from that question, especially if they are a church leader, and especially because we have embryonic children directly under the GC's responsibility. By the way, if you ever find out that a church leader from the GC is visiting your church or institution, please buy me a plane ticket and I will bring my camera and ask them to their face on video to explain this. Now, there's a lot more that can be said about IVF, and we'll touch on a few more points, but before we continue, this problem by itself is already enough. We don't need to continue. The GC flagship institution has already admitted on their website to creating children and either putting them in the freezer or throwing them away. And according to the CDC, they are also impregnating single women. Now, these problems are already enough. Anyways, problem number 2, please take a moment to think this through. It is wrong to put human beings in a freezer, especially children who cannot consent. In today's world, we have the technology to take an embryonic child, immediately freeze them in liquid nitrogen, and then thaw them out years later for implantation. However, simply because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. Suppose, for example, that you had a 6-year-old boy or a 15-year-old daughter, and suppose that we have the technology to put them in a freezer and then thaw them out 10 years later. Suppose that you argued that freezing them would be okay if they gave their consent. Now, even if we grant the argument that freezing them with consent is morally acceptable, I don't agree. But even if we agreed, that's still a problem for IVF because unborn children can't consent. The right to life, by definition, means the right to one's own personal life as it progresses naturally through each stage of development. Nobody has the right to interrupt or delay your development by sticking you in a freezer. People today, we have become so accustomed to the ubiquitous acceptance of IVF that people now think that it's okay to stick other humans in a freezer. It's not okay, and it's certainly not okay for Christians who believe that God is the author and giver of life. If the Lord Jesus wants to put someone in a freezer, then let him do it. That's not for us. That's not our responsibility. And by the way, what if the power goes out? Does Loma Linda have a generator to keep the kids frozen? And what if the generator doesn't work? Where is the GC policy for those situations? And why is that not published anywhere? Problem number 3, we already addressed impregnating single women in the previous video, but what about donors and surrogates? How exactly are we as Bible Christians supposed to justify getting pregnant using third-party eggs or third-party sperm? Our entire biblical view is that marriage is between one man and one woman, so how can we allow third parties to be involved in procreation? How does that work? IVF clinics are required to report to the CDC, and according to the reports published by the CDC, available to the public, see the links down below, Loma Linda also offers the service of gestational carriers, which is just a euphemism for using surrogates. So a woman can have her egg fertilized with someone else's sperm, and then they place the child in a completely different woman's womb. How in the world can the Adventist Church sanction and allow this? This is crazy. This flies in the face against everything that we teach about marriage and sexuality. And then there's the problem of getting sperm from sperm donors. Many times men are taken to a room where they are given porn and they masturbate to porn to produce sperm. Since Pastor Mark Finley likes to be the public defender of the church on official issues, I'd really like Pastor Finley or Elder Ted Wilson to explain how this relates to our mission. Where does our institution of the GC get their sperm? Does Loma Linda have a masturbation room? How does that work? And just out of curiosity, if the answer is yes, how far away is the masturbation room from the Ellen White Study Center? That would be really awkward, huh? Anyways, moving on, problem number 4 is that the IVF industry openly supports this for homosexuals and people who are single. Notice that the Loma Linda director is a member of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, ASRM, but this is the exact same organization that has repeatedly claimed that, quote, individuals and couples should have access to fertility services irrespective of, read it for yourself, marital status, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Again, quote, infertility clinics should treat persons equally, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. And that's the official position of the Ethics Committee for the ASRM, and it's very disturbing. Does Loma Linda follow this? We need to know. Problem number 5 is embryo testing. Does Loma Linda test embryonic children to see if they are fit enough for use? And what exactly is the infallible objective standard for a frail sinner to decide whether an embryonic child should be given a home or not? One of the biggest problems of IVF is that we have effectively become God. Procreation is entirely separated from sexual intercourse. We decide when to get pregnant. We decide who will live or who will die or who's going to go in the freezer. If you are unwanted, we just put you in a freezer or just dispose of you by flushing you down the drain. Church leaders will not let tithe money get flushed down the drain. So what about children? By the way, the church has a published statement here titled Considerations on Assisted Human Reproduction, which unsurprisingly has all sorts of weird and problematic claims, such as the use of third parties, such as sperm donors, ovum donors, and surrogates introduces a number of medical and moral problems that are best avoided. What in the world does it mean, best avoided? Is that some type of suggestion? Notice that when it comes to tithe, pay very close attention. When it comes to tithe, church leaders never say situations where members want to send tithe elsewhere are best avoided. You notice how the language is completely different. And notice the title Considerations. That's a synonym for thoughts. These are just a bunch of thoughts. The official statement of the Adventist Church itself literally is just thoughts. Or check this out. Procedures. Procedures such as IVF require prior decisions about the number of ova to be fertilized and the moral issues regarding the disposition of any remaining what? Remaining pre-embryos. But this is completely false and absurd because there's no such thing as a pre-embryo. Either you are an embryo or you are not. Either you are a human being or you are not. You may remember several years ago how Elder Conrad Vine was correctly criticizing the General Conference for publishing many official statements that were not voted by the Annual Council. Well, no surprise here, if you scroll down and you look who approved this, this was approved again by the AdCom, not by the Annual Council. Very different. Leaders in the Adventist Church are notorious for trying to employ the tactic of separating issues and creating a dichotomy between the church and the issue in order to avoid accountability and responsibility. But the beauty here is that they are directly linked. This is a GC. This is the GC hospital directly engaged in the commerce of little children for money. They're not doing this for free out of the goodness of their hearts. There's a lot of money in IVF. In California, the average cost just per cycle is between $15,000 and $40,000. This is not some charity. And to be clear, this video is not meant to be an exhaustive treatment of the IVF issue. This simply addresses the direct involvement of the General Conference and the consequent massive problems. If you want to watch some good videos or see material on this topic, I'd recommend anything with Stephanie Gray Connors, a very articulate, knowledgeable speaker. She makes the great point that it's important to acknowledge that the desire to have children is natural and healthy. There's nothing inherently wrong with the desire to have children. The problem is not with the desire, but with the method. Furthermore, just because someone desires children does not mean that you have a right to have children. It's okay to have a desire, but that does not mean you have a right to have children. And if you desire children, that does not mean that any method is morally acceptable. A common response to here is that IVF is not bad because I know someone who was conceived through IVF, but the answer is, so what? That is a non sequitur. Just a few days ago, I was sitting next to a family who conceived children through IVF. The husband works for the church and they have several children. But simply because someone is conceived by IVF, it does not follow that therefore it should be practiced or that it does not have serious problems. And of course, simply because someone is conceived through IVF does not mean they're any less valuable. Our value, our dignity as human beings is not based in how we are conceived, but in who we are because of the kind that we are. We are human beings made in the image of God. How we are conceived does not affect that value, but that of course doesn't justify different methods of conception that are problematic. Now, on a related note, I myself have discussed with my wife the option of embryo adoption. That's where married couples who can't have children or who want to adopt more can adopt an unwanted embryo. We are open to it, but as we are now both in our 40s, the chances of success are very low, especially once you get past, for the woman, once you get past the mid-30s. So at this point, I'm not aware of any ethical or serious objections to embryo adoption. The topic of children in embryo state also highlights another important point about the consistency of being pro-life. Keyword is consistent. If you are going to oppose abortion 5 minutes before birth because it's wrong to intentionally kill a living human being, then to be consistent, you must also oppose intentionally killing a human being 5 minutes after fertilization. However, you will notice that the pro-life movement in general, especially in the United States, does not spend or has not spent much time talking about related issues like IVF or birth control pills that cause abortion because doing so would undermine or even reverse important gains over the last several decades. Unlike abortion later in pregnancy, there is tremendous public support and public opinion is in favor of destroying the unborn child early in pregnancy. if the pro-life movement really presses on the IVF issue or problem with the pill issue, they risk losing public support. However, as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, we are in a very different position. We have a solemn mandate and command from God to tell the truth. So we don't have the luxury of ignoring issues or remaining silent in order to maintain favorable political or public opinion. And that's simply talking about the issue. What we have here is something much worse because we are actively, directly involved and engaged in it. And what's worse, this problem has been happening, as they boast right here on their website, for over 30 years. Again, do the math. If 29 children were destroyed at just one time for just one patient, you can just imagine how many children have been destroyed and flushed down the drain for over 30 years. And all of this points to Elder Ted Wilson. He is the #1 man. He is the president. It was under Wilson's leadership that the 2019 position on abortion got passed, which he claimed was biblical, but it's not. It was under his leadership the pro-abortion protocol was published by the GC Health Ministries with zero accountability and zero consequences. And it's under his leadership that Loma continues to engage in the commerce of little children, the impregnating of single women and keeping little boys and girls locked in the freezer. As president, there is, of course, a lot of things that he cannot do, but there is certainly a lot that he can do. But he does nothing, and by all appearances, allows this with his tacit support. So it should go without saying that if the president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church cannot even defend the Sixth Commandment and a child's right to life, if the president of our church can't even defend children, then he is unfit to be the president and needs to be fired or removed. Our situation today is so bad that we actually long for a leader in the Adventist Church who will actually defend the Sixth Commandment. Amazing, huh? Anyways, that's enough for today. We will discuss more related issues in future videos. Thanks for watching.